why don't things begin to exist out of nothing all the time? Now, my first thought was to say, how do we know that they don't?
That is honestly one of the most desperate and unintellectual arguments I've ever heard. What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Cross Unit. I'm your host, Brother Maverick, and before I forget, please hit that like button, guys. Hit the sub button and the bell for event notifications, please, and thank you if and only if you like the video. Now today, guys, we have Cosmic Skeptic, one of the atheists out there that I actually do respect and admire the most, even though we disagree on many of the things that he says. But in speaking to William Lane Craig, he kind of exposed himself to a very illogical way of thinking, and I want you guys to go ahead and check it out for yourselves. Even if you're not a big believer in God or you don't believe at all, even atheists out there, I'm sure, could agree that what he was saying or the argument that he was trying to make was very illogical and makes absolutely no sense. But it exposes how sometimes atheists have to sacrifice extreme intellectualism just for the sake of trying to say it couldn't have been God. So having said that, guys, let's go ahead and check this conversation out, and you will catch my thoughts maybe a little in the middle and of course on the other side. Let's man up.
The kind of other justification that you might give, and the one that I found really interesting, was saying if things can come into existence out of nothing, that is, if you deny the first premise, then why doesn't it happen all the time, right? Why don't things begin to exist out of nothing all the time? Now, my first thought was to say, how do we know that they don't?
You know, the craziest thing to me, guys, real quick, and I'm sorry to interrupt so fast, but the craziest thing to me when it comes to this kind of stuff is the fact that atheists don't even realize how much faith they have, right? They hang so much of the things that they believe on blind faith, things that have never been observed, evolution, right? No matter how many holes you poke in that, just so many things that cannot be proved, right? And I know there's any number of people out there who argue and say, well, you can prove evolution, and believe me, I can dismantle that in 30 seconds. But they still believe it. They believe in it. They believe all the time in things you can't see. But then when you tell them about God, they call you ridiculous. I'll never understand it.
Right, because to come into being out of nothing would surely imply coming into existence not within the universe, because everything in the universe is not nothing, as we've said. And so to come into being out of nothing, it would have to somehow come into being outside of the universe, and therefore we wouldn't observe it. So maybe it is happening all the time, but we wouldn't be able to observe it by definition.
Yeah. Here, I think you're making the same mistake that we talked about earlier when you spoke of the horse coming into being in the living room.
Yeah.
Thinking that therefore it's not out of nothing. And what I explained there was that I'm saying without an efficient cause. That's what I mean by out of nothing. So if things could come into being without an efficient cause, it seems inexplicable why things aren't just popping into existence all around us, things of different sorts, because they don't need efficient causes to bring them into being. This was an argument that A.N. Pryor developed, and I found it just completely convincing.
So let me how can I put this? A horse. How about an argument like this? Now, I've heard what I think might be this kind of line of argumentation from you before, but I don't want to put words in your mouth. So if someone were to say something like, and it seems absurd on the surface, but if they said something like, well, what if it's the case that universes are the only thing which can come into being out of nothing, right? A horse can't come into being out of nothing, but there's something about the universe, and we already know that the universe is a special kind of something compared to everything within the universe. It seems to kind of have we need to think about it in a different way.
Yeah.
Could we not say something like, well, maybe things do come into being all the time, except the only thing that can come into being out of nothing is a universe, and therefore we wouldn't be able to observe it?
As A.N. Pryor said, prior to its existence, the universe doesn't exist so as to constrain what can come into being or not. So you can't say that only things of a certain kind can come into being without efficient causes, because without their causes, there just isn't anything to constrain it. So I don't think that you can say that only certain kinds of things can come into being without efficient causes.
Yeah, now the argument that I didn't want to put it in your mouth was one that I've heard elsewhere. People would say the argument that the reason you can't say that only universes can come into being out of nothing is because nothing doesn't have any properties, and so therefore can't have a kind of preference for universes over other things. My response to that was to say, what if the necessity of it being a universe is not a property of the nothing, but a property of the thing? And let me explain myself. For example, if we, human beings, create a circle, it has to be round, right? We can't create a square circle. But that's not due to a property of us. That's due to a property of the circle, right? So in the same way, although nothing has no properties and so can't prefer universes, what if only universes can come from nothing because of a property of the universe, not because of a property of nothing?
So then how would the physical laws change once that universe is created? If you can create a universe out of nothing, then what is it about physical law that stops that very same occurrence from happening within that very same universe, which supposedly popped out of nothing? A horse, which is infinitesimally smaller than a universe, cannot pop out of nothing, but an entire universe, which is billions, possibly even trillions of light years across, can.
Right. That is exactly what you would have to say, because as you say, properties only inhere in existing things. Beings have properties, not non-being. So you'd have to say it's an inherent property of the universe that it can spring into existence without a cause. And I just can't make sense of that.
Which sounds absurd.
Something that doesn't exist come into existence without a cause because it has a property after it's come into existence.
Yeah,
I mean,
it sounds strange, but the reason why I think it's useful to think in those terms, or at least of the possibility of it happening, is because specifically the objection that why don't things pop into existence all the time? I suppose what I'm trying to do is make at least a far-fetched case. I'm trying to show at least a possibility that things could come into existence out of nothing, and yet by definition we'd be incapable of witnessing it. So maybe things do come into existence out of nothing all the time, but because these are only universes, we'll never be able to observe it, we'll never be able to see it.
Let me commend you for your method, Alex, because by pushing these questions, what you help the atheist to see is the intellectual price tag of his atheism. And I think that's very valuable. One of the goals of the Christian apologist will be to try to raise the intellectual price tag of non-belief. And if non-belief or non-theism requires me to be a mereological nihilist, to think that things have an intrinsic property, that they can come into being, that other things don't have, this is all raising the intellectual price tag of non-belief. For me, at least, Alex, just way, way beyond what I'm willing to pay. And so that's helpful that you're doing this.
That is a really, really interesting way of thinking about apologetics, and the argument that we're having is kind of like, what's the better deal here, right? Because both worldviews seem at least consistent, but you've got to ask yourself, how much you're willing to sacrifice of your intuitions, how much you're willing to sacrifice of the beliefs that you think are true in order to hold to those conclusions. And the key point is taking the justifications that we're giving and showing what they lead to.
So first and foremost, how does the Bible address the concept of something coming out of nothing? Well, Hebrews 3:4 says it clearly. For every house is built by someone, but God is the builder of everything. That verse alone is enough to expose the nonsense that we just heard from Cosmic. Now, don't get me wrong. I like Cosmic Skeptic a lot. He's intelligent and very respectful. But he really did throw me off with his line of thinking in this video. Because let's be clear, what we just witnessed wasn't logic, it wasn't science, and it certainly was not philosophy. It was pure, unfiltered desperation. Cosmic is trying to argue that maybe things do come into existence from nothing all the time, but we just can't see it. Yeah, that was his argument, and I want you guys to think about that for a second. But William Lane Craig, he's pointing out the obvious. If something could come from nothing, why don't we see random objects popping into existence all around us? I mean, really think about that, guys. Where are all the uncaused burritos materializing in your kitchen? Where's my brand new car appearing out of thin air? Instead of admitting the flaw in his reasoning, Cosmic goes into full speed absurdity and says, well, maybe things do pop into existence, we just don't notice because they happen outside of the universe. What? We don't even understand the majority of what happens in our own universe, and he's making assumptions about what might be happening outside of it. Okay, sure. But are we seriously supposed to believe that somewhere beyond all space and time, things are just magically popping into existence for no reason and somehow it doesn't happen inside of our universe? That is the intellectual equivalent of saying ghosts exist, but they're invisible and they only show up when no one's around. Come on, man. Then he takes it even further and says, maybe only universes can pop into existence from nothing. What? So let me get this straight. You're claiming that out of all possible things that could appear without cause, only entire universes get a free pass? So a horse appearing in my living room is too ridiculous to consider, but an entire universe emerging from nothing is totally reasonable. The thing that scientists think is billions, sometimes even trillions of light years across, you're saying that can pop into existence out of nowhere? That makes absolutely no sense. You see, that's what happens when atheism demands a price too high to pay. The atheist has to sacrifice reason itself to avoid the conclusion that God is real. And that's where the Bible warns us. Romans 1:22 says, claiming to be wise, they became fools. Because think about it, guys. If nothing really means nothing, it has no properties, it has no rules, it has no laws. That means that it can't prefer to only produce universes, but nothing else. Nothing doesn't make choices. Nothing doesn't have a will. It doesn't have free will. It can't make choices. But do you see what just happened there? Cosmic unknowingly proved that something must have guided the creation of the universe. If universes cannot come from nothing randomly, but he still insists that only universes can emerge, then he's admitting that there must be some kind of property that governs the entire process. And guess what? That's exactly what Christians have been saying all along. They'll do anything to disagree with us, even if it sounds completely absurd. There is a creator. There is an intelligent cause behind the universe. That cause is God. I'm sorry. You guys can argue against it all you want. It's not going to change it. So what's really happening here? And honestly, it's pretty simple. The intellectual price tag of atheism just got way too high. And William Lane Craig did what every Christian apologist should do, which is aim to expose the cost of rejecting God. I'm sorry, guys, but atheism isn't just wrong. It's nonsensical. It forces people into ridiculous mental gymnastics just to avoid admitting what's obvious to everyone. Something doesn't come from nothing. Period. I don't care if you like that or not. And if you want to argue that universes are the exception, you're not arguing science anymore, you're arguing religion. So what's the lesson here? It's pretty simple. If you have to invent invisible universes that no one can see, imagine magic laws that only apply to the cosmos, and redefine nothing to mean something just so you can avoid saying God did it, maybe, and I'm saying just maybe, you've already lost the argument. Hey guys, I pray to God that you liked the video, and if you did, please type amen in the comment section if you agree, and if you don't, go ahead and leave those comments also. Just keep it respectful. As always, please don't forget to like the video, hit the sub button, share the video, and smash that bell for event notifications, guys, so you never miss a new video. If you love what you see and you want to become a channel sponsor, you can hit that join button where the sponsorship trailer will explain the different tier options and the perks that you'll get as a result of joining each individual plan. Also, don't forget to check out our merch store, as I've recently added a ton of new merchandise to the store, and I would love to see nothing more than to see some of you guys wearing the Cross Unit logo out there in the wild. Lastly, the link to my Buy Me a Coffee is there as well. Of course, you're not required to do any of that. Just having you here with me is more than enough, and I am extremely grateful to God for your fellowship. As always, guys, be safe, be good, and be blessed. Remember that Jesus is King and the literal only way to heaven. So for those of you who haven't started a relationship with him yet, please consider it, because when he comes back for his people, it's gonna happen just like this.
Down.